You know, one of the things that fouls people up, and unless you've actually been through this drill, it's hard to explain, right? But I'll try to make it understandable. When you're playing with hot rods, when you're dealing with modified things, street machines, race cars, when you're dealing with high performance parts or custom parts, nothing ever fits together quite the way it's supposed to. There's always going to be tiny differences between them, right? That are like a unique fingerprint. And that fingerprint is going to be unique from engine to engine, from builder to builder, from situation to situation. And here's the simplest example. So push rods, okay? From the factory, all push rods are going to be about the same. When they're assembling the engine on the assembly line, the builder, whoever's assembling the engine, doesn't grab each individual push rod and stick it in the engine and make a precise measurement. No, they grab from a bin of push rods. They need 16 of them, and they go and they drop them in, or it's done by machine. But the reason they can do that is because everything is done to what they call production tolerances. There's a plus or minus that allows a push rod, let's say that's 0.03 of an inch longer, to fit on a deck that's machined 0.02 of an inch shorter, let's just say, and it'll all fit together, production tolerances. But if you're going to do the same thing on a modified engine, on something that's been a part that's been machined, that has different cam, different lifters, different heads, different valve springs, different rockers, whatever it happens to be, you have to treat each individual push rod as its own separate entity, because the builder, as he was going through the engine, found that this setup here this is off 0.02 of an inch, so I'll use this length push rod here. Things change. Like for instance, you'll have a set of push rods in a motor, and you'll have seats dropped in the head. Now all of a sudden, the valves don't sit quite in the same place. You know, you could use lash caps, or you might order a different set of lifters, or I should say a different set of push rods. And they'll be custom. So as a rule of thumb, what happens is when you're building a regular street engine with production tolerances, you can take all the push rods out of the motor, throw them on a pile, throw them in a valve cover, and when you go to reassemble it, just take them and drop, and you're good to go. But when you're doing a hot rod motor, you take each push rod and you put it in exactly the spot that it came out of. You make a little, you can do it in a piece of cardboard or whatever, and you'll drop them all so that they all go back into exactly the same holes that they came out of. That's the example of that. So this is what I came across today. My friend Devin, we did that video on the Mustang 2, his wife's car, and he has that Challenger. So a couple days ago, Devin throws me a text and he says, I'm stuck. I said, what's the matter? He says, I'm 100 miles from home. The car was driving along fine. I was giving it gas, it started missing, bucking, backfiring, and it dropped out on the side of the road. So I started to walk him through the troubleshooting process. He's not a mechanic. So I start walking him through the troubleshooting process, and we come across that it has no spark. It's got the coil wire out, somebody's cranking the motor, and we've got no spark. All right, fine. So he gets the car towed home. So I head over there and I check it out, and I see that what they did was they converted the car. Originally it had points. They converted the car to electronic ignition. This is the distributor that they used, and it's an aftermarket one, and it's got a lower quality pickup on it. You can tell it's got that Chinese thing to it, right? So at any rate, I saw what they did with the car. When they converted it to electronic, they wanted to hide everything. So they've got the wiring all hidden, and then the control boxes under the dashboard. And I was like, okay, we can now start backtracking and figure out everything that went wrong here, or we could just convert it simply back to points, turn the key and go, right? So he agrees. He says, yeah, that's the way to do it. So we pick up this distributor. So I go to take this distributor and drop it in this morning. And, well, before I even did that, I went to take this one out. And what I found was the bolt that holds the hold down was jammed tight. I mean, jammed tight to the point that I was like, if they went any tighter, this thing was going to snap. I roll it all the way. I finally get it all the way out. It's the right bolt. It's the right length bolt. But in order to keep this distributor in place, they locked it down. Not really thinking. So I take this out and I go to plug this one in. I put this one in and I take a couple of washers, thinking that maybe the bolts in the block are a little fugazi. So I put a couple of washers between the head of the bolt and the clamp to hold it down. and I tighten it down, and I find that this thing is still flopping around. It's not tight. I tighten it down some more. It's still not really tight. Put another washer on there. I cut a little bit of an edge off the end of the clamp that holds it down. So now I've got it to where it's kind of tight, right? You know, it's acceptable. Go start the car. He turns the key. As soon as he turns the key, I see that this thing is wobbling, right? I said, oh, gee, okay, something's going on here. So I pop this out, and I look down into the engine, and I see that it's got a bronze distributor gear, which means that somebody converted this engine to roller cam. So when you convert these from roller cam, this is the stock, the stock one. When you convert them to roller cam, you use a bronze gear because because of the difference in metal compatibility. So to use a bronze gear on a roller cam. The bronze gear is a custom part. They're not necessarily going to be an exact duplicate of the factory one. The factory one is designed that when you drop this thing in there, it's set up for production tolerances. The relationship between the tang at the bottom of the distributor and this right here is going to be such that, you know, the tooling differences, the factory knows that the first block that gets machined over here is going to be dead nuts perfect. This 1000th block that gets machined here may be a little bit off. And because this has to be done on the assembly line, all of these parts are assembled for production tolerances. And so you really don't have to pay much attention to it. But now you take the aftermarket bronze gear and you drop it in there. And now your production tolerance thing goes right out the window. So what I found was, when the engine builder put this one together, so let's just drop this in here. I'm not going to fight with that now. When the engine builder put this together, they found that there was a difference, that they couldn't get it tightened down. And so what they did was they cut this right here. They trimmed that down. And here is the stock one. And you can see that there's a chamfer on that one, and that part of the chamfer has been cut off of there. Or here's the difference in height right there. I don't know if you can see that. Can you see that? Okay. So, but what they didn't do is they didn't cut this part down. So while this part fit into the new gear at the right height, this part here wasn't. This was bottomed out. So when the distributor got tightened down, even though it was like sitting pretty much where it's got to be, you could still take it and go like this with it. So now to make this distributor work, what happened was, because there was that tension, you'll see that there's supposed to be an 0.008 of an inch air gap between the pickup right here, and when this is loaded down and the engine is rotating, this is actually hitting the pickup, and that eventually killed the pickup, that vibration. That's why it dropped down on the highway 100 miles from home. So now what I've got to do to put this together, get that out there. What I got to do to put this together is duplicate their cut on the flange, on the tang, right? But I've also got to take this part here down about 0.010 of an inch, between like 10 and 20 thousandths of an inch. So I got to cut this chamfer and I got to grind this down, and then it will fit into the bronze gear and mate to the register the way it's supposed to, and you shouldn't have any more problems with it. This is something you need to be aware of when you're messing with hot rods. This is normal. This is not like something that's, oh, it's a freak thing. You know, no. This is actually par for the course. And it goes for like every single part, from the accessory pulley to the flywheel, everything in between, top to bottom. I recently, a couple months ago, had a guy show me an extremely rare, extremely virgin set of cylinder heads, right? Like, these things were like perfect. And I was like, at first I'm looking at them, I'm like, oh God, right? They're beautiful. And then I noticed that on the intake flange side, they had been machined to where you could clearly see there was a major difference between this part of the flange and this part of the flange. And they did that because somewhere along the line, during corrective machining or bad machining, they didn't square the decks. So when they put the heads on, the intake manifold didn't fit. So they took the heads and they machined it so that the intake manifold would fit. Great. When that engine was put together, it was fine. It all worked fine. But now you take that set of cylinder heads and they're useless to man or beast, because unless you put them back on the block they were machined to fit, and the intake manifold they were machined to fit, they're not going to be able to be used for anything else. So and when you're buying used performance parts, always be aware of that. Always look for machining, always look for little variances, you know, because a race engine, a high performance engine, something that's been machined like that, you never know how things are gonna lay, and you never know what steps somebody is going to take to correct it. So I may have had it happen to myself many times where I'll buy a part, let's say at the swap meet or used, you know, off of another racer, and you go to put it on your deal and completely different. This thing will not work, even though it's the right part number, the right manufacturer, whatever it happens to be. Somewhere along the line, somebody put their fingerprint on it, and it's never going to be the same again. So the devil is in the details, you know. That's the difference between getting this stuff, you know, to work for you and to where it's going to work against you and you pull your hair out. So that's it. I hope you got something out of that. I'm going to go on to the distributor now. I'll see you tomorrow.